Hello, I'm Sudipto Mandal, and welcome to Reflections on What's Your Ism. As you know, I have started this reflection segment to create some breathing space between episodes to hold on to an idea for a little longer before moving to the next topic. And don't forget that What's Your Ism is also available on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. I'm designing these episodes as an immersive listening experience, so you might want to turn on your headphones or your speaker. Alright, so now in this episode, I'm trying to look back at the conversation I had with the human rights activist Professor Haragopal and the former president of the Chhattisgarh PUCL, Degree Prasad Chauhan. And this conversation, of course, was about the ongoing war in Dandakaranya between the Maoists and the security forces. Okay, so this episode is a little long, so I'm breaking it into three segments. That is the state, the Maoists, and civil society. I'll start with the state. Now, Haragopal and Degree Prasad's positions on a range of issues were obviously contrasting. But the one thing that they agreed on was the role of the state. Both said that the state has always responded to the Maoist challenge with disproportionate and indiscriminate violence. Whether it is the BJP or the Congress, P. Chidambaram or Amit Shah, Operation Green Hunt or Operation Kagar, the approach seems to be the same. In fact, this isn't only about the BJP and the Congress. Parties across the ideological spectrum have preferred a military solution to the Maoist challenge. Instead of addressing social and economic inequalities in the resource-rich Dandakaranya region, instead of spending on health, education and infrastructure, they poured millions into arms and ammunition. In the interview, Haragopal gave the example of the Telugu Desam party, how N.T. Rama Rao and later his son-in-law Chandrababu Naidu had a ruthless approach to what was then called the People's War Party. It later merged with the Maoist Communist Centre or the MCC to form the CPI Maoist. It's useful to remember here that when he was campaigning across Andhra Pradesh for his newly formed party in 1983, NTR had described the Naxalites as patriots. He used them in various ways in his bid for power. But when he formed the first non-Congress government in Andhra Pradesh, he quickly fell back in line with the state policy. And he didn't do it reluctantly, but with a great deal of enthusiasm. In fact, another example comes to mind over here, that of Mamata Banerjee's Trinamool Congress. This was the time when the Maoists of Jungle Mahal were locked in a murderous battle with the Marxists who ruled West Bengal. As Mamata and the TMC were trying to establish Bengal's first non-Marxist government in 3 decades, their understanding with the Maoists was an open secret. In fact, the senior TMC leaders of the time, including Suvendu Adhikari, were accused by the West Bengal CID of supplying arms and funds to the Maoists. But the equation with the Maoists of Jungle Mahal completely flipped on its head after the TMC came to power in Bengal. Also, today, Suvendu Adhikari is in the BJP. A key feature of the current operation in Chhattisgarh is that it is led by the District Reserve Guard, or the DRG. The difference between the Salva Judum and the DRG, as Professor Haragopal pointed out, is in just legal technicality. Salva Judum was a militia created by the government by funding and arming civilians to fight Maoists in Chhattisgarh. This was in the mid-2000s. It was banned by the Supreme Court in 2011 based on a petition by the activist Nandini Sundar. But before Salva Judum was banned, it had unleashed a wave of terror in Dandakaranya. There were widespread reports of rape, looting, extortion, and wanton killings by Judum fighters. Ironically, Salva Judum means peace march in the Gondi language. Justice Sudarshan B. Reddy and Justice S.S. Nijjar expressed horror at the actions of the militia and said it was unconstitutional and illegal to supply arms to common citizens. What is interesting about the period is that the Salva Judum was started by the Congress leader Mahendra Karma, but it found an ardent supporter in the BJP's Raman Singh, who was the chief minister of Chhattisgarh at that time. The Salva Judum, in fact, marks a period of rare consensus between the BJP-led Chhattisgarh government and the UPA-led union government. Shivraj Patil supported it when he was the Union Home Minister, and so did P. Chidambaram. When the Supreme Court banned the Salwa Judum, saying it was illegal to arm common people, the state responded by creating the DRG. The same people who were in the Salwa Judum were recruited in this new outfit. Only, it was no longer a private militia but a formal wing of the state police. Basically, when the Supreme Court questioned the legality of arming common citizens, the government simply gave them a badge and a gun and turned them into policemen. The Salwa Judum has now been replaced with the DRG. But the interview with Digri Prasad Chauhan suggests that the horrors have not yet ceased in the jungles of Dandakaranya. Digri, who led a fact-finding mission last August into the alleged encounters by the security forces, found that even children had been killed in this latest round of violence. The point to note in all of this is that supporting one militia to fight another has been a key element of the Indian state's counterinsurgency strategy. We saw it in the 1990s in Kashmir with the rise of the Ikhwan-ul-Muslimin and its leader Kukka Pare. It was a militia that was armed and backed by the Indian agencies to fight the Hizbul Mujahideen. Similar tactics have been used elsewhere like in Punjab or in the Northeast. And here's an interesting fact. Both Kukka Pare, the founder of the Ikhwan, and Mahendra Karma, the founder of the Salwa Judum, died a brutal death. They were both killed by the same militants against whom they were used as mercenaries. I want to make one last point about the state before looking at the criticisms against the Maoists. Professor Haragopal said in the interview that several senior police officers and bureaucrats developed a vested interest in the battle against the Maoists. They started acting independently of the political establishment. We saw this recently in Karnataka in the killing of the Maoist commander Vikram Gowda by the anti-Naxal force. This was in November last year, if you remember. By all accounts, Vikram Gowda's unit was in talks with the Naxal Surrender and Rehabilitation Committee appointed by the Siddaramaiah government when the police rushed in to kill him. The journalist Naveen Surinje, who led an independent fact-finding mission to the spot, found several clues suggesting that the encounter was fake. His detailed report was also published in the News Minute. Now, if you want more such detailed reports and quality public interest journalism, consider supporting the News Minute by becoming a subscriber. At TNM, we refuse to take sides blindly and insist on returning to difficult questions. Scan this QR code on your screen if you're watching on YouTube, or tap the link in the description if you're listening on a podcast app. Now let's return to the contradictions within the Maoist party. I think it's important to talk about the political establishment and the security establishment first because, unlike the Maoists, they are bound by law. At the same time, it is impossible to ignore the contradictions of the Communist Party of India, Maoist. Sympathizers of the party often seek to portray their violence as a response to the brutality of the state. But I feel that the Maoist party's contradictions emerge from their failure to live up to their own ideals. And when revolutionaries with guns lose sight of their ideals, they degenerate into warlords. I think nobody has made this criticism more eloquently and with greater impact than the late Marxist intellectual, human rights lawyer, author, and activist K. Balgopal. Let me read to you a small section from the selected writings of Balgopal. This piece was written in 2007, just 2 years before Balgopal passed away. There are many vantage points from which excessive reliance on violence may be criticized. That it displaces the agency of the people and makes the revolutionary the agent of change is a central political critique. The human rights critique is to some extent parallel to this, but not identical with it. Generalized violence draws a shroud of silence over events. It has the effect of shutting out critical thought and the faculty of assertiveness, which is fatal to the well-being of human rights. Initiative rests with those who hold guns, on whichever side they may be. Rebels who employ violence systematically often attribute their decisions to the people, but the people in truth have very little say in the matter. They become spectators of the political process, which is a denial of an essential democratic right. Those who agree with the rebels may well be content, and to the extent that the majority agree with them, the contentment may well appear universal. But contentment is no substitute for democracy, a fact that becomes alive the day the agreement ceases. What Balgopal warned us about wasn't just violence, it was the politics of control behind it. When the guns speak, ordinary people stop being political agents. They become bodies in someone else's war. The thing about war is that young people do the shooting while old people call the shots. Of course, this applies to wars against Maoism launched by people like Amit Shah or Chidambaram. But it also applies to the so-called People's War of the Maoists. And nothing illustrates this better than the killing of the Maoist party's 70-year-old General Secretary, Baswaraju or Nambala Keshav Rao. Initially, there were rumors that Baswaraju was picked up from a hospital in Odisha where he was being treated for an illness. But a few days ago, a press note from the Maoist party clarified that there was indeed a gun battle in the forests of Narayanpur. This was between the group guarding Baswaraju and the security forces. The press note said that 26 guerrillas died in the battle trying to protect Baswaraju. They alleged that after the last guerrilla died fighting, their general secretary was captured alive and then murdered in cold blood. The press note said that Baswaraju's team was surrounded and outnumbered by thousands of government troops. I just couldn't help but wonder why Baswaraju did not surrender when it was clear that there was no way out alive. This also raises the question about who was fighting for whose cause. One can either look at it as 24 cadres died while trying to protect their leader. Or you can look at it as 24 youngsters, most of whom were Gondi-speaking Adivasis, died trying to protect an elderly Telugu-speaking Savarna engineer. This isn't just about this incident. In the last 40 years, that upper caste Maoist leaders have been fighting for the rights of Dalits and Adivasis in Dandakaranya, they have failed to create a leadership among the Dalits and Adivasis. And this is where I want to discuss Mandvi Hidma, who the Maoists say is the commander of the last major fighting unit of the People's Liberation Guerrilla Army, the PLGA. He's also one of the only Adivasis in the top leadership of the party. Dalit and Adivasi leaders like Manish Kunjam and Digri Prasad are saying that the Maoists have started projecting Mandvi Hidma as the face of the party when they are on the verge of a collapse. They expressed a deep discomfort with the portrayal of Hidma as a military figure. They felt that it reinforces the racialized stereotype of Adivasis as bow and arrow toting savages. For a party that has practiced the crudest forms of violence, its leadership has always been romanticized as intellectuals who happen to have guns. I've never heard Charu Majumdar, Kanu Sanyal, Kondapalli Sitaramaya, Kishanji, Ganapati, or even Baswaraju described as military commanders. But Hidma's profile is full of stories about the various gunfights and ambushes that he has been part of. Unlike the Savarnas in the party leadership, like Baswaraju, who had an M.Tech degree, Hidma joined the Maoists after his 10th standard. I suppose the Maoists would say he's a student of the revolution. But the fact is that he's a child of war. He joined the Maoists when he was not even a fully grown man. The press note by the Maoists makes another interesting point about Baswaraju. It says that the party leadership had been trying to persuade the General Secretary to move to a safer place since the beginning of this year. But he supposedly refused, saying martyrs keep revolutions alive. It is in fact a telling commentary on the psyche of those who imagine their death as the beginning of a memorial project. Those who actively seek martyrdom, They blur the lines between revolutionary zeal and narcissism. An important point that came to the fore in the interview with Haragopal and Degree Prasad is the ideological divide within the civil society and human rights circles. The Dalit and Adivasi leaders of Chhattisgarh have been taking stands that contrast with the positions of activists such as Haragopal, Bela Bhatia, and Nandini Sundar. Take, for instance, the statements made by Manish Kunjam, who is the most prominent Adivasi voice in Chhattisgarh. While the Coordination Committee for Peace, led by Haragopal and others, has been demanding a ceasefire and calling on the government to start peace talks with the Maoists, Manish Kunjam made an interesting counterpoint. He said that for years he has been trying to push the Maoists to enter peace talks without any success. The Maoists were not interested in peace when ordinary Adivasi cadres were being killed by the thousands. Now that their top leadership is getting wiped out, they are offering peace talks. The leaders of the Coordination Committee for Peace have been repeatedly saying that the state wants to get rid of the Maoists because it has eyes on the mineral resources of Dandakaranya. Here again, Manish Kunjam counters this narrative by pointing out that the fight against mining companies such as Vedanta, SR, Jindal, and the Tatas were non-violent. He said that the presence of the Maoists in fact delegitimized their non-violent struggle. Kunjam has also said that there is a need to reconsider the Jal Jangal Jameen narrative. He said that if mining has to be done in the Adivasi areas, the local population must be made stakeholders in the projects. Before I conclude, I want to discuss the future of Maoism in India. It is quite clear that the Communist Party of India, Maoist, has been decimated. But is it the end of the unrest in the Adivasi heartland of India? Manmohan Singh had described the Maoists as India's gravest internal security threat. But I dare say the greatest internal security threat is posed by hunger, poverty, and oppression. I think it is useful here to quote from the judgment passed by Justice Reddy and Justice Nijjar on the Salva Judum. They said, "People do not take up arms in an organized fashion against the might of the state or against fellow human beings without rhyme or reason. Guided by an instinct for survival and, according to Thomas Hobbes, out of a fear of lawlessness that is encoded in our collective conscience, we seek an order. However, when that order comes with the price of dehumanization, of manifest injustices of all forms perpetrated against the weak, the poor, and the deprived, people revolt." That's all I have time for in this segment of reflections on What's Your Ism. I hope I've offered enough provocation for you to respond to. Write to me. My email ID is sudipto@thenewsminute.com. You could also show your appreciation by paying me for my work. You could do that by subscribing to the News Minute and by scanning this QR code. In the next episode, I'm interviewing the activist, author, and actor Du Saraswati.